The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a magazine and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.
All right, we're back. We're to our last speaker of the midway point in the virtual 2020 Best You Expo. I'm really excited to bring Michael in. I'm going to bring him in right away. Michael, how are you, sir?
Good to see you.
What do you think of live TV? Last minute little details, kind of switching things up. You didn't know if you were going to make it technically, and here you are.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we're excited to have you. So as we were correcting some of the technical stuff and we got you on at the last minute, awesome to have you here. I lost the bio, so I do want to do a proper introduction for you, but I'm going to have you kind of share with us, since I haven't had my green room interview with you now, a little bit about what you do, and then I'm going to let you have the stage.
Well, it sounds funny, but I think I'm going to have to look myself up. I'm not really sure what I do. So basically, you know what? Here it is. I've actually got the bio. I'll read you my official bio. Michael Neill, that's me, is an internationally renowned transformative coach, the best-selling author of 6 books, including Super Coach, Creating the Impossible, The Inside Out Revolution, and The Space Within. Michael is often described as the coach's coach and commands extraordinary respect within his field for unleashing the human potential with intelligence, humor, and heart. He spent the past 30 years as a coach, advisor, friend, mentor, and creative spark plug to celebrities, CEOs, royalty, and people who want to get more out of themselves and their lives, and has been consistently ranked by the international research agency globalgurus.org as one of the top 30 coaching thought leaders in the world. His TED Talks, Why Aren't We Awesomer? And Can a TED Talk Really Change the World? Have been viewed by nearly 2 million people. And his weekly podcast, Caffeine for the Soul, is now in its 19th year and going strong. His books have been translated into 24 languages, and his public talks, retreats, seminars, and online programs have touched and transformed lives at the United Nations and in over 60 countries and 6 continents around the world.
I could not have done better myself. How'd it feel to introduce yourself?
Well, I always hear my bio and think I'm going to be taller, but in this format, nobody can tell. So we're fine.
No, and this is great. Obviously, you've done a lot of great stuff, and we're honored to have you on the main stage and share with us. And you're wrapping up today. So what I'll do is about 10 minutes before, I'll come back and you can wrap up. But I just want to give you a proper bookend. But again, I'm going to open the stage up to you and enjoy the next, say, 40, 45 minutes.
Perfect. I will do. Thank you very much.
Neill, thank you for being with us.
All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. And I was talking to Bernardo. So I've known Bernardo for many, many years. I first met him, 15 years ago, maybe 16, 17 years ago. I was working with Paul McKenna and Dr. Richard Bandler in the UK. And we were doing NLP trainings as part of Bernardo's, I think it was called NLP Life Training. I'm not sure if it still is or if it's now under the Best You brand. And I've enjoyed over the years watching Bernardo go from front of house to front of stage, taking himself from someone who uses his talents to enhance the talents of others in a performance setting to actually being one of those performers himself. And the reason I say all that is because when he asked me what I would want to talk about, the thing that really seemed to fit the bill. So I am a coach. I'm a performance coach. I'm an executive coach. So I work with leaders. I work with performers in terms of in the arts, musicians, comedians, actors, but also people in sports and people in sales and people in things where we don't necessarily think of them as performance fields, but how they do matters. And what I chose as a topic was how to be at your best when it matters most. Because as a performer, and I'll take an extreme, an Olympic athlete, it really doesn't matter how you perform for 3 years and sometimes 364 days and 23 hours and 55 minutes. It matters how you perform for about 5 minutes in 4 years. That's crazy if you think about it. That is unlike any other profession, and it's an extreme. But what are the things that would cause an Olympic athlete to perform at their best when it matters most? And are they relevant? How are they relevant for those of us who have a little more leeway in our performance, which most of us do? And so what I've done is I've come up with a set of about 5 distinctions. And these are distinctions that may be surprising to you. You may initially hear them and go, oh, no, that's not how it works, because they are not the way performance is generally talked about. What they are is the way performance actually works in the field. And they offer a whole new way of thinking about performance, one that will make it easier for you to be at your best more of the time, including when it matters most, and will probably make it easier for you to enjoy performing in whatever field. And I say that because most people do suffer from some form of performance anxiety. I used to be an actor, and I used to vomit in the wings before going out on stage. There was a bucket waiting for me, and I would throw up, and I'd go out stage, and I'd do my little shtick, and I could do it, but it really wasn't fun. And so what I learned for myself over the years, and what I've learned with the clients that I work with, is that what it actually takes to be at your best is not what you'd expect. And I'll begin with what the best place to focus is. So we assume that the reason we want to perform at our best is to create the results. So we want to win. And we might want to win the sale. We might want to win the meeting. We might want to win the negotiation. We might want to win the match. We might want to win the tournament. We might want to win the medal. We might want to win the prize. But putting any of your attention on that while you're performing is the beginning of the death of high performance. Performance will lead to results, but focusing on results does not lead to high performance. So I'll give you an example of why, and this might be a fairly easy one for you to imagine. So back in the days when I worked with Bernardo and Paul and Dr. Bandler on the NLP seminars, one of the things that we used to do is we would do presentation training. And traditionally, presentation training involves somebody videotaping you doing your presentation and then critiquing it. And then you go back up and do it again. What I discovered fairly early on is that the more we did that, for most people, not all, but most people, they would get more and more self-conscious. They would get more and more awkward. If they were a little stiff and we filmed it and pointed out how stiff they were, the next time they'd be stiffer. If they didn't quite know what to do with their hands and we pointed it out on the video, the next time, the hands would be tucked away or hidden or in some way just awkward. And so I decided to try something a little different. We started aiming the camera at the audience instead of at the speaker. And so when we watched it back, the speaker for the first time would be seeing what was actually going on in the audience. So instead of seeing their own scary thinking, instead of thinking about where are my hands and what do I do and how's my voice and am I and all the things that happen in the traditional ways of focusing on the trying to get a better result. By focusing on the audience, it took all the attention off of me and put it onto my feedback mechanism. So when you're performing, there is feedback that lets you know how you're doing. If you're a comedian, it's generally speaking laughter. If you're a speaker, it might be attention. If you're a salesperson, it might be interest or curiosity. But in anything we do it as part of a feedback loop. In other words, we're not performing in isolation. Now, what I'm doing right now is probably as close as we get to performing in isolation, because you can see me, but I can't see you. So I don't have my normal external feedback on this one. But I've been doing this long enough that I have a feel for it. And that's one of the keys to high performance, is you will not perform at your best until you get a feel for what it is like to perform at your best. And you start to see in its simplest form that self-consciousness is at one extreme of the scale and high performance is at the other. So if thinking about the result makes you more self-conscious and gets you more in your head, it works directly against you.
For complimentary resources from my book, my complimentary e-course, The Power of the Question, or recommended reads, go to www.thequestion.com/resources. For more information on my coaching or mentoring, go to www.bernardo-moya.com.
Now, what is presence? Well, there are whole books written about what is presence. There are whole movements written about what is presence. There are whole spiritual traditions built around what is presence. There are all sorts of teachings about how to boost your presence, as in your stage presence, your charisma. But effectively, what is behind stage presence, what is behind charisma is actual presence. In other words, if you're really present while you are doing what you're doing, you're going to do it to the best of your abilities. Now, your abilities might not be up to the task, and I'll give you an example of that. So one of the things that people think is more important than presence, but actually tends to lead to self-consciousness, is pressure. So a lot of people think they need pressure to perform at their best. Oh, I'm at my best, when the stakes are the highest, I'm automatically that way. But if you notice, it's not really true. When you're really feeling the pressure, when you're really up in your head, self-conscious with the pressure of trying to get the result, or trying to be at your best, or trying not to do this with your hands, or trying to do or not do whatever it is you think you're supposed to do or not do, that's interfering with your presence. That is between you and being here. And so it becomes a limiter on your performance. Now, if you're good enough, it won't matter that much. But if you're at that stage where you're still developing your skills, and chances are for all of us, we're still at that stage where we're developing our skills, then you want as little between you and presence as possible. And pressure is one of the things that gets in the way of presence. So if I'm up in my head going, oh God, I got to deal with this, and this is so stressful, and what if I miss the shot? What if I make the shot? What if there's a story about the golfer Annika Sorenstam that was told to me by her coach, the person who was her coach early in her career. And the story he told me was that she, if you don't know her, she has been for many, many years, I don't think she is anymore, but the number one player on the LPGA, on the International Golf Tour. And for years, she would come in second in almost any tournament. She outplayed the field, but when the pressure was on, when they were coming down the stretch, when they were hitting the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th hole, she would find a way to come in second. And when her coach worked with her, what he discovered was she was terrified of public speaking. And so when she would start to get towards the end of the holes, the pressure she was feeling was not the pressure of golf. She'd been playing golf the whole time. And it wasn't even the pressure of winning. It was the pressure that came when she began to think about the speech she would have to give with all the cameras on her and all the people if she won the tournament. And what he wound up doing was just working with her on her fear of public speaking. And then her golf took care of itself. But the reason that it worked is because it got her out of her head and let her go back to playing golf. One of the most dramatic examples I ever saw of this was in the last Summer Olympics, the 2016 Summer Olympics. And it was watching synchronized diving. And I had never watched synchronized diving before. If you've never watched it, it's actually really cool to watch. It's basically two divers, and they're doing the exact same thing, twisting and spinning and landing from great heights. And it's surprisingly exciting and artistic and fun. And the Americans and the Chinese and the Brits were in the top three, and they were wrestling for medal position. And if I'm remembering it correctly, the Chinese wound up winning. But the television coverage, at least here in America and over in England, was pretty much focused on the American team and the British team. So when they interviewed the American team had obviously done a lot of high-performance training for their moment in the sun to try to be at their best when it mattered most. And they had all these techniques that they shared to cope with the pressure. So they had done hypnosis, and they'd done meditation, and they'd done NLP, and they'd done visualization. And they'd gone through a whole series of techniques to get their brain into the right mindset for success, to handle the pressure. The Brits had a completely different take. When the interviewer would ask any of the British divers how they were handling the pressure, the answer was always, what pressure? And the reporter would look confused and go, well, the pressure of being in this competition when everything's on the line. And they would go, well, we can only do as well as we do. It doesn't really feel like everything's on the line. And the reporter would go, no. But there are millions of people watching. And the divers would go, well, I guess technically on TV, but there's still the same number of people watching us here as would normally watch us dive in a competition. And despite the reporter's best efforts to convince these divers that there was real pressure that they had to deal with, in their minds, they just didn't create the pressure. So they didn't need to cope with it. They didn't create self-consciousness where they were hyper-conscious of what was going on inside themselves. So they were free to just be present to the dive. Now, there's an important caveat to this story. The Americans took silver. The Brits took bronze. And sometimes when I tell the story, people go, well, you see, the American approach to pressure worked better than the British approach. No, the Americans were better divers. So in sport, the most winning basketball coach of all time was a college basketball player. He's no longer with us, named John Wooden. So he was a Hall of Fame basketball player in high school. I think he was either with Purdue or Indiana University. He went on to become a basketball coach there, and then went on to become the basketball coach at UCLA for many, many years, and won 10 consecutive national championships, including 3 undefeated seasons in a row. Now, what was interesting about Coach Wooden is he really spent a lot of time paying attention to performance. And there were a few things he noticed that were completely counter to the high-performance culture in athletics that was being put forward as this is the way it works when he was a coach. And one thing was about why does sometimes, no matter how well you perform, you lose. And he had a very simple maxim. He said, the team with the best players usually wins. So again, results aren't on us. They're not up to us. What we can do is perform at our best or get in our own way. We can perform free, present, unrestricted, or we can get all up in our heads. And one of the ways that Coach Wooden noticed that people got up in their heads, his players got up in their heads, is they would look at the score. And so he found a very simple solution. Every player on his team that I've ever seen interviewed over the 10 plus years of championships before, well, there wasn't an after because he retired at the top of his game, said the same thing. They said he never once would talk to them about winning. The first conversation he would have with them every year is how to put on their socks. Now, once he had credibility, I imagine you would just do whatever Coach Wooden told you. But I don't know if you can imagine you're the hot player in your high school, in your town, in your city, wherever you are from, and you go to the best program in the world. And the coach sits you down and you're like, oh, what bit of wisdom is he going to give me about high performance? How is he going to bring out the best in me? And the very first talk he gives you is about how to put on socks and how to lace up your shoes. Now, there was a couple of bits of method to his madness. One was a lot of the things that get in the way is people get blisters. And a lot of people get blisters because they would put their socks on wrong and not tie their shoes properly. So there was a point to it. But it was also the beginning of systematic training in paying attention to what is within your control and not paying attention to things that are outside of your control. In the 1996 Olympics, I remember an interview with the U.S. rowing team, and they had a very strict way of answering questions. And anytime there'd be a question about their opponents or about the weather or about past performance, they'd all answer, that's outside my boat. As in, I can't control that, so I don't even want to think about it. If it was a question about rowing, if it was a question about strength, if it was a question about working together, well, that was inside their boat. So they would do their best with that. Now, each example that I'm giving is an example of how the focus on performance versus results allows you to show up present instead of preoccupied, instead of self-conscious. I'll give you another example. Years ago, I worked with a comedian. And when I started working with him, he was playing pubs in London. And he would go around from pub to pub. And on a good night, he would do 6 shows, like 6 10-minute gigs at different pubs and comedy clubs around London. And I think he was getting like paid £25. The audiences would be anywhere from 5 to maybe 50 people. Well, he kept working on his craft. He got very good. He got a couple of lucky breaks. And he called me and he said, I want to hire you for a week to be on call because I'm playing a 3,000-seat theater. And I want to be at my best because this is the biggest show of my life. And as it happened, I was busy. I had other clients. I had other commitments at the time. So what I said to him is I said, look, let me save you some money and save me some time and conflict trying to reschedule things. What are you going to actually be doing in front of those 3,000 people? And he said, well, my act. And I said, and have you done your act before? He said, I've been doing it. I've been honing it for years, 2 years. And I said, does it go well? He said, well, that's how I got the gig. I won an award at the Edinburgh Fringe, and I did this show, and I did that show, and I went on this television show, and that's why I'm here. And I said, so stop telling yourself it's a really big show. And he laughed. But the point was made. He had created a pressure by focusing on things and blowing them up as if they were super important, and it preoccupied him. And it was getting in the way of him just being present and available to perform at his best. As soon as he stopped doing that, he went back to the default, which is presence, because presence is the default. In other words, when you're not up in your head thinking about stuff, where are you? Right here, right now. But we do so many things that take us back up into our heads, and we do them thinking they're going to help. So here's another thing that we do that sounds like a great idea, but actually works directly against our being able to show up fully present, fully available, open to feedback, not in our heads, so we're picking up what's going on inside us and what's going on around us. One of the things that is said so much about high performance that people consider it a truism is that you have to have a positive mental attitude. Now, I used to believe that. I used to believe that for myself. I used to believe that as a coach, and I worked very hard to try to cultivate a positive mental attitude. I would do affirmations. I would do visualizations. When I got into NLP, I would do mental programming so that I would be in an optimal performance state when I stepped onto the stage or when I stepped into whatever arena I was performing in. And sometimes it helped and sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, I assumed it was because I didn't do it well enough. But that's sort of a setup. If somebody tells you they've got a system, and when it works, it's their system, and when it doesn't work, it's you, there might be something off about their system. And so what I began to notice was when I stopped trying to be positive, my levels of performance went through the roof. Now that threw me until I understood why. Because when I was in my head trying to control my thinking, trying to control my body, guess where I wasn't? Here, in the arena, present. I was partly present and partly in my head. And I started to notice, the less I have on my mind, the higher my level of performance. Now, there were days where I'd have a lot on my mind, right? I'd have all sorts of thinking going on, and I didn't add to it by trying to fix it or control it. But I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. But then I went, well, what if it isn't? What if it doesn't matter what mood I'm in when I start? What if I can throw myself into the swimming pool, regardless of my state of mind, knowing that by the time I hit the water, I'll probably be really present. And that when we're present, the feelings we need, the thoughts we need come up in real time. We talk about it as flow. Flow is where I'm having just the right thinking at just the right time, just the right ideas coming into my mind just when I need it, just the right access to resource is available to me at the moment where I need it most. It's part of our design. We are designed for optimal performance. We get in the way of it, ironically, trying to improve our performance because it puts our attention on us. It's another way of thinking about it. If I'm looking around for a flashlight as if I'm going to have a flashlight here. I don't have a flashlight here now. But if I did, I would shine it in my face right now. Or actually, probably I would shine it in your face. So you could get the experience of being temporarily blinded. Well, worrying about what I'm thinking and feeling while I'm trying to perform is like shining a flashlight in my face and trying to do anything. It's not going to go well. But if I turn the flashlight around and start attending to what is going on around me, I'm going to do as well as I am capable of doing. Here's another example. I have a friend who is a sports marketing agent. And in fact, he was the original sports marketing agent. He used to run Madison Square Garden, and he used to be vice president of the NBA. And he was very, very active in the sporting world. And he was telling me about sitting down one day with Pete Sampras, who was the number one tennis player in the world for many, many years, and was kind of known for being pretty unemotional on the courts. Like not robotic, but not very expressive either. And he said to him, what did you do to work on your mindset? What did you do to always be in this Zen state of mind? And Sampras laughed and said, I was almost never in a Zen state of mind. And he said, well, what do you mean? You always seemed so cool. I mean, you never lost a point because you lost your cool. And Sampras laughed again. And he said, I lost whole matches because I lost my cool. And Billy asked him, well, what did you do about it? And Sampras laughed and said, I didn't really do anything about it because the truth is, I didn't really care how I felt. I just wanted to play tennis. And therein is the key to being at your best when it matters most. If you allow your attention to be on what you're actually doing, not the result you're trying to create or the pressure you're making up because, oh, this is such a big deal, or this is such a big deal, or if this happens, or if that happens. You're just really there, engaged in what you're engaged in. And when we're doing what we're doing without much else on our mind, we tend to do it pretty well. And even when we've got a lot on our mind, it doesn't mean that we have to do anything about it. I remember another tennis match with Venus Williams and Serena Williams playing doubles. And they were playing terribly. Like, they just were off their game. And John McEnroe, another great tennis player from the past, and a very emotional one, he was being asked as the color commentator. He said, "Oh, what's wrong with the Williams sisters? They're really off their game." And he said, "Well, they're not playing great, but they're competing really well." And what he was pointing to was that even though they just didn't have their A game that day, they brought their B game. They brought the best of themselves that they had on that day to the court. They weren't losing it between points. They weren't getting upset every time they hit the ball out. Now, I'll contrast this with somebody who's not the Williams sisters. He's my son. So when Oliver was 15, I think, and in high school, he decided to try out for the tennis team. And he had not played very much tennis. We just didn't play much growing up. But I used to play a bit. He tried a little. And we would go down to the courts, and he would get so angry because he would keep hitting the ball into the net. He'd hit the ball out of the court sometimes. And I finally saw what was going on. And I could see he was just putting a ton of pressure on himself. And I knew, well, pressure, preoccupation, self-consciousness, that's not going to do it.
For more information on collaborating, partnering, sponsoring, supporting, or speaking at any of our events, or finding out more about our legacy clubs, go to www.thebestyou.co. If you're interested in finding out more about the amazing content we have, please go to www.thebestyou.online and get your 14-day free trial now.
What's going to help him is just being present to the game. And so I said to him, hey, I'm going to make a deal with you. I'll practice with you as often as you want, right? I will come out and play whenever you want on this condition. The first 100 hits of every session, you're not allowed to have an opinion. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't care if you hit it out of the park. I don't care if you hit what you think is a perfect shot. I don't want to even know how you feel about how you're playing until you've hit 100 shots. And when you've hit 100 shots for the day, you can express your opinions as vocally and in whatever language you choose. And he went with it. And it was really interesting because he no longer was preoccupied with how he was doing. He was no longer attending to everything about his mental attitude and trying to get his head straight or anything like that. He was just hitting the ball. Guess what he got good at? Hitting the ball. And over time, he got good at hitting the ball where it was supposed to go. And over time, he got good at hitting the ball where the other person wasn't. And he got to a point where he was pretty good at tennis. Now, the same thing had happened 8-9 years earlier when we moved to America from England. So in England, he'd grown up watching a bit of cricket as a young boy. And I loved sport. So as soon as I got him back to America, I wanted him to become a baseball player because I loved baseball as a kid. So I was going to live out my unfulfilled dreams through my son, like you do. And about a week in to his first season, he came home and he was in tears. And he sat down with my wife and I. And we said, "What's wrong, Bear?" And he said, I hate baseball. I don't want to play anymore. And, I could see my dreams going up in smoke. And I was like, well, why do you hate baseball? And he said, because I suck at it. And it was, he was so vehement. He was so angry about it. And my wife and I just kind of looked at each other and she was like, over to you, coach. And so I sat down with him, age 6. And I said, you know what? You do suck at baseball. Now, why would I say such a negative thing? Because he sucked at baseball and he knew it. And lying to him was not going to increase my credibility going forward. I said, the question is, Do you want to get good at it? And his eyes lit up. It had never occurred to him that baseball wasn't genetic, that actually it was a skill. And like any skill, it could be learned, it could be improved, and ultimately, if you stuck with it, it could be mastered. And so I said to him, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to work on your mindset. We're not going to work on your attitude. Every day, you're going to throw me the ball 50 times. I'm going to throw you the ball 50 times. And you're going to swing the bat at the ball 50 times. And I said, in 1 month, we're going to do that for a month, every day. And I said, and if you still want to quit in a month, and it's like a 4-month season, so that still would have been pretty early. You can quit, no questions asked, no problem. And he said, okay, well, what do you think happened? Within about 2 weeks, he was playing pretty well. Within a month, he was one of the best kids on the team. And suddenly he loved baseball. Now, you can hear that as a cute story, right? You hear that as, oh, that's sweet. Oh, good parenting. Nice job, coach. But for me, what that really is an example of is something that is true for all of us wherever we are in our careers. If we put our attention on being good, on being good enough, on how am I doing, all it does, generally speaking, is make us feel crappier and crappier and crappier. And then if we've learned we're not supposed to feel crappy, we're supposed to feel good and positive and empowered, then we add even more noise to our noise. And it just gets worse. Let me do another draw. Okay. So here's sort of the two approaches to performance. So here's our first. And they're going to perform really well. Now, there is a space in us, an openness, a receptivity in presence that in my work I talk about as consciousness. I don't have a better word for it. It's just presence would be another word for it. I'm going to symbolize that. Right? That's our availability to fresh thinking in the moment, fresh ideas in the moment, things coming to us in real time and being able to bounce and adapt to what's actually happened, regardless of what we practiced or rehearsed. And then within that, we get a bit of thinking. Might be positive thinking, might be negative thinking, might be random thinking, but it's just whatever happens to pop into our heads. And you either need to almost become a yogi so that you have no thinking in your head, or you need to just accept you're going to have a bit of thinking in your head, but it's pretty wispy, right? It doesn't really weigh on your mind. It's not heavy. Now, what happens when we try to work on our thinking, when we try to work on our attitude, when we try to work on our mindset, when we try to bring a positive mindset to every performance situation? Well, it looks a little something like this. So there's still me, right? And I've still got this space, this channel, this consciousness, this bandwidth. But the reason it's squashed down is because I've got some thinking that I don't think is the right thinking. It's not helpful thinking. It's negative thinking. It's daunting thinking. It's whatever kind of thinking I think I'm not supposed to be thinking. And so what I start to do is I start to think about my thinking. I start to think about changing my thinking. And I start to think about my inability to change my thinking. This goes on the height of the Empire State Building, right? And the weight of all that thinking shrinks my capacity. It takes me out of presence. It limits my availability to this real-time responsive feedback mechanism that's at the heart of performing at your best, where you kind of almost know what's going to happen before it happens. Like Wayne Gretzky, one of the all-time greatest hockey players, used to say, most people skate to where the puck is. I skate to where it's going to be. Now, he didn't know where it was going to be because he'd studied a lot of books about where it was going to be. He developed a feel for it through presence. And when he was really present to the game, he could see what was going to happen almost sometimes actually before it happened. If you talk to a baseball player and they're hitting the ball really well, they generally don't say, I'm hitting the ball really well. They say, I'm seeing the ball really well. And in fact, one of the players I remember Dr. Richard Bandler working with in our NLP trainings used to literally, when he was hitting well, the ball would look like the size of a basketball coming in instead of a baseball. And when he wasn't hitting well, the ball would be like the size of, like smaller than a golf ball. So it looked like he was hitting better, but he was hitting better because the way he was experiencing things was almost like in slow motion. I don't know if anyone is of the generation to remember the original series, The $6 Million Man. So the $6 Million Man was basically an astronaut. And he went up into space, and it was a terrible accident, but they rebuilt him. They made him better. And part of what they gave him was these bionic legs that made him super fast. Now, to show how fast he was in the show, they filmed everybody else in slow motion. When you are performing at your best, it feels like things are happening in slow motion. When I am performing at my best in a sales situation, I can hear the objection before it even makes it to the other person's lips. I can see what's going to excite them about what's possible before I've even said it. When I'm at my best as a coach, I can see what's going on in someone's head before they even know it themselves. Everything slows down. That is a natural function of presence. When you are truly present, the moment isn't tiny, it's vast. It's what Einstein talked about in his special theory of relativity. So there's a story about the theory of relativity that Einstein's secretary said to him, Dr. Einstein, I need you to explain relativity to me. And he was like, why? No offense, but like, why? And she said, because I get so many people reaching out to me asking me to explain it as somebody who works with you. And so Einstein thought about it, and he gave her this advice, which he actually wound up appending in the abstract to his paper on the theory of relativity. I don't remember if it was general relativity or special relativity. And he said, you know how when you're sitting on a swing with your beloved, hours pass in minutes? And you know how if you put your hand on a hot stove, a minute can seem like an hour? He said, that's relativity. Well, we're designed in such a way that when we get really present with our environment, it expands. Time bends. It slows down. You've probably had the experience that not all hours are created equal. They say there are so many hours in the day. There's only so many hours in the day, as if all hours are created equal. But have you noticed that some hours feel like they take forever, and some hours feel like they're over like that? Well, part of the function of presence is time expands. It slows down in our perception. And when time is moving slower, it's easier for us to perform better. And that's just a function of presence. It's not a skill you need to develop. It's built in to the mechanism. And the more you get a feel for that, the less of a good idea it feels like to do anything that's going to take you out of the moment and back up into your head. Whether it's trying to control your thinking and your state of mind and your attitude, whether it's trying to use pressure, trying to add pressure to the game to get yourself to perform better, whether it's thinking about the thinking about the result, thinking about the result, thinking about the result, as if you could will a result into being and just bypass performance. So let me back up and sort of put this to you directly. Because the way that we're doing this, you're not able to ask me questions. You're not able to give me examples. So I want you to think about this for yourself. I want you to think about a situation where you were at your best. And I just want you to notice, did you have a lot on your mind? Were you really focused on your attitude? Were you trying to think positive? Or were you just there? Were you thinking through exactly what you're going to do? And then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. Like my son, when he went on his first date, and we went out for burgers before at lunch the day he was going to go on the big date in the evening. And he's like, okay, Dad, I got my notes. And I was like, notes? He said, yeah, I made a list of things that I'm going to say to her and questions I'm going to ask her if things start going badly. And in my mind, and hopefully in your mind, you're going, oh dear, that is a terrible idea. Well, it's a terrible idea for the same reason that trying to think your way to high performance is a terrible idea. What was going to help him more than anything else on that date was just being present, just being with the girl that he was with. And what helps us in any performance situation is being as present as we can be to the performance and not preoccupied or self-conscious with what's going on inside us. Now, hopefully that just seems like common sense to you by now. But if you're a high performer, if you've been trained or conditioned that no, high performance is the result of optimizing my state of mind and body and then let me share another story with you. And this is a hockey player named Zach Parise, and he was a longtime center for, I'm going to forget the team. I think either the Minnesota Wild or the Dallas Stars, or maybe he played for both. But a friend of mine coached him, and he was explaining to him. And this is a guy. He was captain of the U.S. Olympic team. He was, an all-star, perennial all-star in the league. So this was a guy who really performed at an extremely high level in some extremely theoretically high-stakes games. And he was adamant that pressure was key to his game. I play much better under pressure. I play at my best when the lights are brightest. I need the pressure in order to focus. And my friend said to him, well, let me ask you something. If I lined up 10 pucks and an empty net and asked you to hit them into the net, how many would you get in? And Zach said, well, 10 out of 10. And he said, how many times? If we did it 100 times, how many times? And he said, probably 100. He said, okay. If I put a gun to your head, or better still, I put a gun to one of your children's heads and said that I was going to shoot him if you missed, would you shoot better? And it was very obvious to Zach that he wouldn't. And hopefully, again, by now, it's becoming obvious to you, oh, yeah, I don't do better when I have more on my mind, even if what's on my mind is the attempt to be positive. I'm going to share one last sports story with you because I think it's a really telling one. I was working with a coach, a golf coach, and he did really cool mindset stuff. Like he would create, he had these like dresser dummies, I don't know what you, mannequins. And he would interview the athlete and he would find out where their positive voice was and where their negative voice was. And, if they motivated themselves, where that voice was. He would create like a 3-dimensional map of their internal dialogue. And then he would record these hypnotic audios using 3D microphones to create the locations of the different voices saying the different things. And it was, honest to God, one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. And so when he hired me to help him, he said, look, I'm really interested in the kind of coaching that you do for myself. but I don't want to mess with my coaching athletes because I'm very successful the way that I do it. And I said, fair enough. And so he started to get insights into the sort of way the system is set up, how we're just designed to do better when we're present than when we're preoccupied. We're designed to do better when we're conscious of the moment instead of conscious of ourselves. And as far as I knew, that was as far as it went, until one day he called me and said, I have a confession to make. And I'm like, cool, what's your confession? And he said, well, here's the thing. I had this one client who reached out to me, and he was ranked like 337th in the world. And I thought, you know what, just almost for a laugh, I'm going to try talking to him about performance the way you talk about performance instead of the way that I know it works. And he just won the Indian Open and got an invite to the US Open and asked me to come coach him. So maybe we could start looking at how this really works. And that's my invitation to you. Now, my hope is that just in listening to this, some things have become obvious to you. It's become obvious that it's not helpful to get up in your head and worry too much about what you're thinking in real time. It's become obvious to you that it's not a great idea to spend too much time thinking about what a big deal what you're about to do is, or why it really matters, or why you've got to be at your best, or how terrible it will be if you're not. Because essentially, scaring the hell out of yourself before you do anything is rarely going to bring the best out of you. But if that is not yet your experience, then I simply invite you to treat it as an experiment. And the next time you are in a performance situation, see what happens if you put down everything you've learned and all your training and just show up and play.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.